The marble foyer of Uncle Richard's estate gleamed under crystal chandeliers as I approached the front door, my government-issued sedan looking modest beside the lineup of Maseratis and Bentleys. Through the massive windows I could see the annual Barrett family reunion in full swing. My cousins networking with local politicians, my aunt showcasing her latest jewelry acquisitions, and Uncle Richard holding court like the self-appointed patriarch he'd become. I'd driven 3 hours from Washington, D.C. hoping this year might be different. Hoping that maybe, just maybe, my family would finally see past their prejudices about my career choice. But as I rang the doorbell, that familiar knot of dread settled in my stomach. Richard himself answered, his face immediately souring when he saw me. At 58, my father's younger brother had built a fortune in commercial real estate, and he never let anyone forget it. His custom-tailored suit probably cost more than most people's monthly salary, and his Rolex caught the light as he deliberately blocked the doorway. "Maya," he said, not bothering to hide his disappointment. "I wasn't expecting you. Dad said the whole family was invited," I replied calmly, smoothing my simple black dress. At 29, I'd learned to armor myself in professionalism when dealing with my relatives. Richard's eyes swept over me dismissively. "Right. Well, I suppose you can come in, but please don't mention your job situation to my guests. Senator Williams is here along with several major donors. These are serious people discussing serious business. My job situation." As if working for the federal government was some sort of shameful secret. Inside, the party was exactly what I'd expected. My cousin Derek, Richard's golden child, was regaling a group with stories about his latest tech startup, conveniently omitting that it had failed to secure any major clients in 2 years. My Aunt Patricia was discussing her charity work, which consisted mainly of attending galas and posting Instagram photos. "Paya." Derek spotted me first, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. "Look everyone, my cousin what is it you do again?" "Something with paperwork." The group turned to look at me with polite but disinterested smiles. I recognized a few faces. Local business owners, a city councilman, Derek's usual circle of networking contacts. "I work in international relations," I said simply. Derek laughed. Right. Government stuff." Maya's always been the practical one in the family. Very stable career choice. The way he said stable made it sound like a disease. "Must be nice having all that job security," added Patricia, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "Even if the pay isn't much. Not everyone can be an entrepreneur like Derek." I nodded politely, excusing myself to find my parents. They were by the bar, deep in conversation with Uncle Richard about Derek's latest venture. Dad looked uncomfortable. He'd always been caught between supporting me and keeping peace with his brother's family. "There she is," Richard announced as I approached. "My niece, the government worker. Tell them what you do, Maya." These gentlemen were just asking about different career paths for their children. The men turned to me expectantly, and I could see Richard's barely concealed smirk. He loved putting me in these situations where I had to explain my supposedly mundane job to his successful friends. "I handle diplomatic protocol," I said. "See." Richard gestured broadly. "Practical work. Very important, I'm sure. Maya's always been good with details." One of the businessmen nodded politely. "Government work is certainly stable. Though I imagine the bureaucracy can be frustrating," added another. "All those regulations and red tape." Richard was practically glowing. "Exactly. That's why I've always believed in the private sector. Freedom to innovate, to really make a difference. Not that government work isn't valuable," he added with mock sincerity, "but it's more of a support role." "Support role." I felt my jaw clench, but I kept my expression neutral. "Actually," I said quietly, "I should probably step outside and check my messages. We're monitoring some developing situations." Richard waved dismissively. "Always working. See, gentlemen? That's the government mindset right there. Can't even enjoy a family party without checking in with the office." As I walked away, I heard him continue, "Don't get me wrong, every organization needs its worker bees. Maya's very dedicated to her little role. But when you're discussing real leadership, real impact on society, well, that takes a different kind of vision." The patio was blissfully quiet compared to the party inside. I pulled out my phone not to check work messages, but to review some very interesting documents I discovered earlier that week. Sometimes my access to federal databases came in handy for more than just diplomatic research. The evening continued its predictable course. Derek monopolized conversations with tales of his innovative approach to app development, while Richard made sure everyone knew about his latest property acquisition. I floated through the party like a ghost, making small talk and enduring patronizing comments about my little government job. "Maya works so hard," Patricia told a group of wives. "It's sweet really. She's always been the responsible one, content with modest goals. Not everyone can be a go-getter like Derek." I sipped my wine and smiled politely as they discussed their children's achievements. Private school acceptances, internships at prestigious firms, engagement announcements. When they asked about my life, their interest visibly waned when I mentioned living in a small apartment and driving a sedan instead of an SUV. "Well, that's practical," one woman said kindly. "Government salaries aren't known for being generous." Richard appeared beside me, having overheard. "Maya's always been practical about money. Very budgeted lifestyle." He chuckled. "Of course, when you're in my line of work you learn to think bigger. This estate, for instance, purchased it from a diplomatic family who had to downsize. Beautiful property, but they just couldn't maintain it properly." I nearly choked on my wine. Which diplomatic family was that? "Oh, some ambassador's relatives. The Hendersons, I think. They had it for decades but got in over their heads financially. Lucky for me, got it at a steal of a price." The Henderson estate. I knew that property well. Very well, actually. "When did you purchase it?" I asked casually. "About 5 years ago. Beautiful piece of land, but they'd let maintenance slide. Foreign service families, you know how it is. They're never really settled anywhere long enough to properly care for real estate investments." Derek joined our conversation, drink in hand. "Dad got an incredible deal. The previous owners were practically desperate to sell. Something about back taxes and estate complications." "Complicated how?" I asked. Richard waved dismissively. "Oh, you know how these old diplomatic families operate. Lots of bureaucratic nonsense, unclear inheritance situations. They couldn't even prove clear title to some of the property lines. I had to spend a fortune on legal fees just to sort out their mess." I felt a familiar chill. The same feeling I got when reviewing complex international legal documents and spotting discrepancies. That must have been frustrating. "Worth it though," Derek added. "The property's tripled in value since Dad bought it. Good thing those people didn't know what they had." "Indeed," I murmured, making a mental note to review the Henderson family estate records more carefully. The conversation moved on, but I found myself studying the property with new eyes. The original features I remembered from my childhood. The diplomatic reception rooms, the formal gardens designed for hosting foreign dignitaries, the secure communications center that had been converted into Richard's home theater. My phone buzzed. A text from my colleague at State. "Tomorrow's visit still on schedule? Security advance team arrives at 6 a.m. I quickly typed back. "Confirmed. We'll meet them on site." Work again. Richard had noticed me texting. "Maya, you really need to learn to disconnect. This is family time." "Just confirming some logistics for tomorrow," I said. "What kind of logistics?" Derek asked with mild interest. "A diplomatic visit I'm coordinating." Richard laughed. "Let me guess. Some minor trade delegation wants to tour the capital?" Maya gets very excited about these small-scale events. I didn't correct him. "Actually," Richard continued, warming to his theme, "that reminds me of something I've been meaning to ask you. Derek's been considering some international business opportunities. Think you could introduce him to some of your contacts? Nothing major, just maybe someone who handles trade permits or international licensing." Derek nodded eagerly. "Yeah, it would be great to meet some real players in international business. I mean, I know your level probably doesn't involve major decision makers, but even administrative contacts could be useful." I looked at them both. Richard with his smug confidence, Derek with his entitled expectation that I should leverage my professional connections for his personal gain. The same relatives who'd spent the evening dismissing my career as bureaucratic paperwork were now asking me to use my government position to help Derek's business ventures. "I'll see what I can do," I said neutrally. "Excellent." Richard clapped Derek on the shoulder. "See? Maya might not move in high-level circles, but she knows the right worker bees. Sometimes that's exactly what you need." My phone buzzed again. This time it was a security briefing update. Tomorrow was going to be very interesting indeed. The next morning arrived with the precision I'd come to expect from diplomatic security operations. At 5:45 a.m., I was already dressed and reviewing final protocols when the advance team's black SUVs began arriving at the Henderson estate, now Richard's property. By 6:30 the transformation was remarkable. Secret Service agents had taken positions throughout the grounds. Communications specialists were setting up secure lines. The estate that Richard had bought for a fraction of its worth was being prepared for a visit that would make international headlines. I stood in the formal garden, watching the orchestrated chaos with satisfaction when my phone rang. Richard. Why, His voice was tight with panic. There are government vehicles all over my property. Black SUVs, people with earpieces. What the hell is happening? Oh, that's the security advance team I mentioned yesterday. Security advance team for what? The diplomatic visit I'm coordinating. Didn't I mention it was at your estate? Silence. Then, my estate? Maya, what kind of visit requires this level of security? Before I could answer, the communications director approached with an update. Ms. Henderson, the secretary will arrive at 10:00 hours as scheduled. The ambassador's convoy is running 5 minutes early. Richard must have heard her through the phone because his voice went absolutely dead. Henderson? Did she just call you Henderson? Oh, didn't I mention? I kept my maternal grandmother's name professionally. Maya Henderson. Probably why you didn't connect the dots about the estate. Maya. Richard's voice was strained. What exactly is your job title? Deputy Assistant Secretary for South Asian Affairs, specializing in diplomatic protocol and international relations. The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. You see, Uncle Richard, when grandmother's estate went into probate 5 years ago, there were some complex legal issues involving diplomatic immunity and international property law. The family needed someone who understood the intricacies of State Department regulations to navigate the sale. I could hear him breathing heavily. I made sure the sale went to someone who would appreciate the property's historical significance. Someone who clearly understood its value. The paperwork shows the sale price was quite reasonable. Roughly 30% below market value, due to the complicated legal circumstances. Why, he whispered. The thing is, those legal complications, they were never actually resolved. The property sale was contingent on maintaining its status as a diplomatic venue for official State Department functions. It's all in the deed restrictions you signed. By now I could see Richard's Mercedes racing up the driveway, weaving between Secret Service vehicles. So when the Secretary of State needed a venue for today's historic peace negotiations between the Indian and Pakistani foreign ministers, well, your estate was the perfect choice. Beautiful, secure, and legally designated for exactly this purpose. Richard's car skidded to a stop near the main entrance, where 2 Secret Service agents politely but firmly directed him to park in the overflow area near the staff entrance. The media arrives in an hour, I continued pleasantly. CNN, BBC, Al Jazeera. Should be quite a spectacle. When Richard, the secretary specifically requested that all unauthorized personnel remain in the designated areas during the proceedings. I'm afraid that includes you. I hung up and turned back to my work. There were still details to coordinate and history to make. The peace negotiations were a resounding success, broadcast live to millions worldwide. The Secretary of State specifically commended my coordination efforts during her closing remarks, mentioning how crucial proper diplomatic protocol had been to the day's achievements. Richard spent the entire event confined to his own kitchen, watching through the window as world leaders signed historic agreements in his backyard. The irony was exquisite. By evening, Derek had discovered the news coverage and my prominent role in international diplomacy. His frantic calls went unanswered. Patricia's social media posts about her important family connections had aged poorly in the span of a single day. The aftermath was swift and merciless. Richard's real estate business suffered when clients discovered he'd misrepresented the estate's legal status to several other buyers. Derek's startup collapsed when potential investors learned about his family's treatment of a high-ranking State Department official, me. Word spread quickly through their social circles. The same people who'd dismissed me as a low-level government worker now understood exactly who I was and what I controlled. Business relationships soured. Social invitations dried up. Derek's networking events became sparsely attended. I never returned Richard's increasingly desperate calls. I didn't need to gloat or explain. The federal databases had provided everything I needed to know about their true financial situations. Richard's leveraged investments, Derek's maxed-out credit lines, Patricia's expensive lifestyle built on borrowed money. They'd wanted to know about real power and influence. I'd given them a masterclass. The Henderson estate remained in diplomatic use, hosting world leaders and shaping international policy. And Uncle Richard got to watch it all from his kitchen window, finally understanding exactly what kind of government worker he'd underestimated.